Amazing Couples by Victor Yap and Doris Mock. Chapter 20. Christ is the head of the home. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 21 to chapter 6 verse 4. What marriage means to you? Different people have different definitions of marriage. So, what's yours? Accountant. Marriage means making a profit, having another person to share the daily expenses. Economist. A man is said to be incomplete before he is married. After that, he is finished. Banker. Marriage is like a loan for a honeymoon. Thereafter, it's all payments. Fireman. Marriage these days are like fires. They go out over time. Mathematician. Give your wife an inch and she becomes the ruler. Musician. Marriage is like listening to a single song over and over again. Ophthalmologist. Love is blind, but marriage is an eye-opener. You have to see eye to eye. Philosopher. Marriage teaches you a great many things you would not need if you had stayed single, such as tolerance. Pianist. Marriage is like a piano. How well it sounds depends on how well you keep it in tune. Plumber. Marriage is like a warm bath. Once you get used to it, it is not so hot. Soldier. Marriage is like a besieged castle. Those who are outside try to get in, while those who are inside try to get out. Violinist. Marriage is like a violin. After the beautiful music is over, the strings are still attached. Washerwoman. Marriage is the most expensive way to get your laundry free. Driver. Marriage is like having a backseat driver. Engineers. Marriage has many more problems to solve than single. How about when two believers marry? Marriage is a beautiful institution that has turned ugly for believers and unbelievers alike. Marriage is more than a courtship, a certificate, or a companionship. It requires work and wisdom. What is the biblical blueprint on marriage for families, couples, parents, and children? Is it a hard and fast rule, or healthy and flexible one? Are we victors or victims in marrying? What is a Christian family? First, wives, let men lead. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 21 to 24. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church, his body of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to the husbands in everything. One of the most talked about news from Prince William and Kate Middleton's royal wedding in 2011 is the bride's marriage vow. Following the lead of Princess Diana, the first royal to refuse to obey when she married Prince Charles in 1981 at the age of 20, Kate Middleton omitted the word obey from her wedding vows. The future Queen of England instead promised to love, comfort, honor, and keep Prince William. However, William's grandmother, the Queen, and his aunts, Princess Anne, Sarah Ferguson, and Sophie Wessex, used the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, which requires brides to love, cherish, and obey. Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who married William and Kate, said he does not support the use of obey in wedding vows. He said it was outdated and could be used to justify domestic violence. Sadly, Diana did not want to submit, and her prince did not love her. My wonderful wife cautioned me about this passage. She said women dislike the word obey. Not one to refuse a tease, I asked my wife, "Did you say obey in your vows?" She said in Chinese, "How could I not use it?" I replied, "It's Murphy, isn't it?" referring to the wedding minister as well as her mentor, who is a conservative Southern Baptist ordained minister. On our wedding day, her mentor, Reverend Murphy Lum, was the officiating minister, and my mentor, Reverend Herman Tang, another Southern Baptist ordained minister, was the speaker, so she had no escape. The Bible's blueprint and counsel for wives is for them to submit, Ephesians 5:21 and 24, to their husbands, but with an unexpected, unsuspecting, and unforeseen twist. First, the presupposed imperative submit is missing from verse 22, but it is borrowed from the context of verse 21's submitting or yourselves in the fear of God, which is a participle which is linked to being filled with the Spirit, verse 18, and verse 24's submit, which is an indicative verb. None of the two is an imperative. While the imperative submit is missing from Ephesians, it is nevertheless present in another almost identical passage, Colossians 3:18. On the other hand, the submission of wives is the key to a healthy, happy, and harmonious marriage, and not a heartless, helpless, and headless marriage. Submit is not an imperative. It simply means under or hupo, and to arrange, tasso, to be under an arrangement, from the Greek. It does not mean that the husband is necessarily superior, strong, or successful. Married women with a higher education and higher income naturally ask, "Why do I have to submit to my husband?" Because men need their wives' respect, recognition, reassurance, and room to do the job God intended them, which is to lead the family. No woman looks up to a man who is insecure, indecisive, inferior, intimidated, inadequate, and invisible. Obviously, a shaky man leads to a shaky marriage. While women do not have the same problem, men cannot live with a wounded, bruised, and blooded ego and esteem. If their respect is shattered, they live in a less manly manner. A man can live without power over others, but he cannot live without pride in himself. Submission is offered not because of the husband's worth, wealth, or wisdom. Why? Because the wife's obedience is to the master, not her man. Verse 22, as to the Lord. So it is a faith issue about the woman's reverence for the Lord, relationship to the Lord, and reliance on the Lord. Verse 23's for, or hoti, is a matter of fact, not the reason. The husband is the head of the wife, and the wife his helper, just as Christ is the head of the church, his body of which he is the Savior. The Chinese say, "A headless snake goes nowhere." Head is singular, so there is just one head. Headship is very important, but Christ is not only the head, but also her Savior as well. What do we mean by Savior? He gave, verse 25, himself for her. Give plus himself occurs 3 times in the Bible, all references to Christ's sacrifice, Galatians 2:20 and Ephesians 5:2 and 25. Curiously, in another passage on the Christian family, Paul also addressed the wife to submit before he addresses the husband, Colossians 3:18. Second, husbands, love your wives, Ephesians 5:25-33. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery. but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. A man was looking for the perfect wife. He wanted to find someone who was beautiful, kind, loving, and very spiritually oriented. He found such a woman, but it did not work out because she was so spiritual that she could not easily relate to the practical things in the material world. Then the man found someone who was perfect. She was beautiful, kind, loving, intelligent, organized, and practical in material affairs. She was just what he was looking for. But it also did not work out. Why? Because she was so practical that she really did not need him so much and ended up being a bit of a nag, always telling him what he should do. So he still looked for the perfect woman. Then he found the perfect wife. She was beautiful, kind, loving, intelligent, organized, practical in material affairs, as well as spiritually inclined. A perfect balance. No one could be better. She would make just what he was looking for, the perfect wife. So friends asked him if they got married. No. Why not? Because she was also looking for the perfect husband. While the husband's identity is in his leadership, the woman's identity is not. Her issue is love, which occurs 5 times in the passage, twice in verses 25 and 3 times in verse 28. His love makes her feel secure and special. Further, while there is no expressed command for wives to submit to their husbands, it is implied and understood from the context. The imperative is for husbands to love their wives, verses 25 and 33. Technically, the only imperative in this text on the family is for husbands to love their wives. Love as a verb occurs 10 times in the book, 8 times in this chapter, more than any chapter in the Bible. Just as a man's identity is related to his dignity and respect, love is essential and everything to a woman. In love, a woman has substance, security, and strength. The model for husbands is to love their wives the way Christ loved the church and gave, or paradidomi, himself for her, verses 2 and 25. Previously, Paul said that Christ gave himself for us, verse 2. Christ's love for the church is love in action. Gave himself means utter, unreserved, uplifting surrender, sacrifice, surrendering to God. Paradidomi means more than give. It means to give over, delivering up oneself completely. Give and give over mean different things. The first is physical and material. The second is emotional and relational. Give is just the gift, but give over is the giver himself. Give is the present. Give over is the person. Give is the object. Give over is oneself. He pardoned us, purchased us, and perfected us. There is nothing more precious, personal, and perfect than giving oneself, which again reminds husbands that the presence is much more important than their presence. True love is sanctifying, sacrificial, and steadfast. Paul listed 2 purposes, and each is introduced by hina, in order to. Jesus' first purpose is to sanctify the church or make her holy, verse 26. True love is pure, perfect, untainted, uncorrupted, undefiled, uncompromising. Christ covered and cleansed her of her sins. Jesus' second purpose is to present her to himself as a radiant or endoxos church, verse 27. The first is for herself, and the second is for him. Holy is who he is, and radiant is whose she is. To be holy is God's gift to you. To present her radiant is her gift to God. There is also a y or for added in Greek. The husband's role is to feed and care for the body, verse 29. Feed is a word found only in this book, appearing in Ephesians 6:4 as bring up and care as a nurse cherishes her children, 1 Thessalonians 2:7. They are not two bodies, but one flesh, Ephesians 5:32. Next, Paul compared a husband's love for his wife to his love for his own body. Paul now switched to the present participle or continuous tense for the second love in verse 28, meaning continuous, unceasing, and unwavering. Self occurs 11 times in the chapter, Ephesians 5:2, 19, 25, 27, 4 times in 28, 29, and twice in 33, more than in any chapter in the Bible. Feeding, verse 30, is physical. Caring is emotional. The first is to nourish, and the second is to nurture, to provide versus to pamper, to train and treasure. The first is attention. The second is affection. Also, the word body occurs 3 times, verses 23, 28, and 30 in the text. There are 3 future verbs in verse 31, leave, join, and become or be. The first is physical, the second is emotional, and the third is identity. Unfortunately, in Asia, sometimes married couples had to live with their parents. A married couple is to leave down, behind, katalepo, and to join toward, proskolao, and be, which is stationary. In love, a husband does not subjugate a submissive wife. He is not superior. In fact, the word superiority is never used. Third, families learn from scriptures to listen and lend a hand. Ephesians chapter 6 verses 1 to 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Nowadays, Hong Kong children are not far from the Little Emperor's label given to children in China. In a July 2010 poll of 657 parents with children ages 5 to 16, 82% of the respondents have only one child. Nearly 90% of the respondents have maids. 80% are unable to do homework on their own, and fewer than 7% manage household chores such as sweeping floors and folding clothes. The replies from parents were startling, with more than 60% saying their children have difficulty controlling their emotions. 68.4% are not obedient. 90% do not help around the home, and only 20% tidy up their toys. Only around 5% of the parents said they have time to look after their children, and so they delegate that task to grandparents or hired help. Almost 90% of children do not help at home. The survey also found 98% of the children spend their free time playing online games and the internet, and 95% attend tutorial classes. If not at school or taking tutorials, 77.9% stay at home. More than 3/4 of parents said their children are not sociable and lack the ability to express themselves. According to the survey, 86% of children receive weekly or monthly allowances, with about 20% getting between HK $500 and HK $1,000 a month. Children, on the other hand, are to obey and honor their parents. Obey and submit are 2 different things. The second, obey, hupakowo, means to under plus hear, or plus acoustics. One reason is that it is the righteous thing to do. The second command, submit, comes not with a reason, but with a purpose, that it may be good with them, and that they may have long life on earth. Also, children are to honor their parents. You might be surprised to know that this is the first time Paul uses the verb honor in the Bible. There is a reason for using honor besides obey. Obedience is the duty, but honor is the devotion. Duty is good, but duty without heart is drudgery. Honor is to acknowledge, appreciate, and even admire their commitment. It is to be thankful to them, thoughtful for them, and tender to them. The purpose, or hina, applies to the first clause, that it may be well with thee, verse 3. The second, that you may enjoy long life on the earth, is an indicative. Paul seems to be equating and interpreting living long on earth with being well with you. This well occurs 5 times in the Bible, once here, but most famously translated twice as well done in the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, verse 21 and 23. Amy Chua, the controversial Tiger Mother, Yale University professor, told in Wall Street Journal about her strict child-rearing regimen. In Chua's article, Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior, she listed some of the restrictions she'd given her daughters, including not being allowed to attend sleepovers, have play dates, participate in school plays, complained about not being able to do school plays, get anything less than an A, play any instrument other than the piano or violin, or opt out of playing the piano or violin. A writer and award-winning parenting blogger chided that Chua's parenting decisions are beyond extreme and could make children fall ill. Others called her abusive for name-calling her daughters and possibly bullying the young girls into perfection. But her daughter, Sophia Chua Rubenfeld, who is Harvard-bound and made her Carnegie Hall piano debut at 14, defended her mom in a letter to a newspaper titled, Why I Love My Strict Chinese Mom. She wrote, Having you as a mother was no tea party. There were some play dates I wish I'd gone to, and some piano camps I wish I'd skipped. But now that I'm 18 and about to leave the Tiger Den, I'm glad you and Daddy raised me the way you did. Fathers are not to provoke their children, verse 4. Provoke implies endangering, exasperating, enraging, embittering, embarrassing, and evading the children instead of educating, embracing, encouraging, and enjoying them. Provoke or exasperate, or parogizo, means to anger alongside. The question is alongside who? Probably the angry father as well. Instead, their duty is to bring them up in the training, paideia, and discipline, admonition, nothesia of the Lord. The former is content, and the latter is correction. Conclusion. Ephesians 5 is a chapter on love. In love, we are dependents and defenders, never dominators or deserters. Love defers and does not demean, delights and does not demand. In love, there is no dread, dishonor, or disadvantage. Bible study questions. Group study. List the characters in the passage and their relationship with each other. What does it mean to submit? What does it mean to love? Why does a man have to leave his parents and cleave to his wife? How should a woman submit to her husband? Verses 22 to 24. How does a church submit to Christ? Verse 23. How is the husband to love the wife? Verses 25 to 30. How does Christ love the church? Verses 25 to 27. From Doris, the psychologist's desk. The biblical concept of love and submission in the husband-wife relationship is much more complex and must be understood in the context of several biblical passages. When I think about love and submission, I realize they both consist of the same psychological quality, the ability to put the other person first. This involves setting aside our self-focus, attending to the other person's physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. In simple words, his or her needs, interests, wishes come first. In love, you freely sacrifice yourself to give yourself to the other person. In submission, you voluntarily subject yourself to the other person as well. Both involve giving of oneself to the other. In practice, this means we must be able to understand our spouse, have the ability to see things from his or her perspective, so that we may know their needs, interests, wishes, pains, etc. One needs to have empathy to be able to do that. This is an important antidote to a narcissistic self-absorption which can poison any relationship. The second component is the ability to let go of one's self, your needs, interests, and wishes. This may mean the ability to delay gratification, to have some capacity to nurture the self. In essence, love and submission require one to move from self to the other. They are the two sides of the same coin. For this to become a reality in marriage, it requires the same quality from both husband and wife. When both are together in the dance, it is beautiful. You cannot dance without a willing partner. When one loves and the other does not reciprocate, it hurts. When one submits and the other takes it as an entitlement, it bruises. Eventually, the relationship can be distorted. No wonder non-believers are skeptical about submission and consider it a precursor to abuse and domestic violence. The secret to success is God in our marriage. My experience is that when I submit as a wife, I submit to God first. As I submit and trust in His sovereign will, it is much easier to submit to my husband. I do not need to be concerned that he makes the wrong decision or does consider my interests. This is because God is in charge. I always come back to this when I find it difficult to submit. For me, the best part about submission is that it helps me to set aside my self-focus such that I can grow in love through the marriage relationship. Also, husbands need to love God first in order then to love their wives. Group sharing. Group game. Have the husbands leave the room first. Wives would pick one thing from her handbag or other personal belongings, and you place them all on a table. Each husband is then asked to find what belongs to his wife. Knowing each other. Each person writes a question regarding knowledge and understanding of the spouse. Group leader can also write all the questions if you prefer a central theme. For example, what is your spouse's favorite ice cream flavor? When you read aloud the question, each person will answer the question regarding the spouse as well as for him or herself. Ask about 10 questions. Sum up the score based on gender. Do women tend to know more about their spouses or vice versa? Couple sharing. Share one thing you have gained because of the marriage. Share one thing that you have to set aside yourself in marriage that you find difficult or challenging at times. Share your perspective on love and submission. Listen to your partner.